Thank you for joining us again for our Women Who Dare documentary screening series. My name is Mani, and I am the Special Projects Associate at NYWIFT, New York Women in Film and Television. This series is part of our 2020 Creative Workforce Summit, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving the women the right to vote. And it's in recognition to women filmmakers and their documentary content that celebrates society, our culture, and the economic changes in history. The series is a 6-week series, captivating documentaries, showing captivating documentaries by some very amazing women filmmakers. And the goal of the series is to show the work of women documentary directors that seek to awaken a collective consciousness through their contributions to our culture, history, and the world. This screening series was created with IDA, the International Documentary Association, and with support for the National Endowment for the Art. This is our third screening, called And She Can't Be Next, which is so relevant right now. And we'll be in conversation with Gracie Lee and Marjan Safinia. We're honored to have this conversation be moderated by Anna Pastor. Anna is an award-winning multidisciplinary artist born and raised in Budapest, Hungary. And in the past decade, her interest moved towards visual arts, more specifically towards multimedia video and film production. And she created her boutique, the production company, Plasma Photo Video New Media LLC. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Here's Anna.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for this short conversation. I am sure that we will not be able to respond to everything because the film is so thought-provoking and so timely. Let me introduce you the two directors who are with us this afternoon. Grace Lee, her most recent credits include director, producer of the POV's first broadcast series, And She Could Be Next, as well as also she is producer and director on the other PBS series, Asian Americans, and some directing credits are the Peabody Award-winning American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Grace Lee Boggs, and the Emmy-nominated Makers Women in Politics, also for the PBS. In addition, the interactive online documentary K-Town 92, Off the Menu, Asian America, and the feature film Janine from Des Moines. The second guest this afternoon is Marjan Safinia. She's an Iranian documentary filmmaker based in Los Angeles. Her films examine identity, community, and social justice. Most recently, she produced and directed alongside Grace Lee, And She Could Be Next, a 2-part documentary series about women of color transforming American politics, which debuted as POV's first ever series in 2020. Until 2018, Marjan was the longest serving president of board of the International Documentary Association and the first woman of color to lead the IDA since its founding in 1982. She is a board member of Chicken and Egg Pictures and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture and Art and Sciences. Please welcome our two guests.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much for joining us. And My apologies. And let's start with the very beginning. How did the idea of the film started, and what was the work at the beginning? How was the film project conceived? What was the inspiration? What was behind? Don't know. Maybe I don't know. Marjan.
I can give a little backstory. I've told this story a lot, but so, both of us are really interested in politics, but, politicians not so much. A little bit more of how this came to be. In 2013, I actually worked on this Makers Women in Politics series for PBS. And that's the first time I met Rashida Tlaib, now newly elected Congresswoman. But back then she was a state representative from Detroit in Michigan. And Rashida was the first time I actually met a politician who I thought, wow, this is someone who I would love to represent me. She was young, dynamic, really down to earth, daughter of immigrants from the Midwest, all things that I hadn't really, sort of associated with politicians. You kind of think about Mitch McConnell or somebody like that, right? And, sort of, all of the films that I've made, and also Marge, sort of look at communities, who make up this changing demographic, rapidly changing demographic in the United States, immigrants, communities of color, women, Asian Americans. And in 2016, we have a third producer, Jyoti Sarda, who had approached me about making something about women in politics. And this is the year we thought Hillary Clinton might be our first woman president. But it also, when that didn't happen, it felt like this is really the time to tell the story about women of color as a transformative political force in the United States. And we just saw that play out like in major ways over this past election just last week. And, we knew that we wanted to tell this story and that it was about a movement, both of candidates and organizers who would, sort of, we asked the question whether democracy is made, becomes more powerful by those when it's participated in by those who are most marginalized. So that's kind of the backstory.
And so you mentioned that you already had the connection with Rashida Tlaib. In terms of logistic, because it's a very widespread. I mean, you follow several characters, politicians, and activists. And so how many will you be able to include in the film everybody who started the follow from the beginning, or there were people who somehow didn't make it to the final cut? How did it start? And in terms of setting up the logistic, in terms of selecting who will you focus on? Marjan, if you...
Sure. Unfortunately, there's no like handy list which gets published on a certain day, which says here are all the women of color running, everywhere across the country. So it was a lot of research to try to find women. And of course, the reason that we focused on women of color is not simply because we think the only thing that matters is, the color of your skin or your ethnic heritage, but really what is your lived experience? And, we have this increasing gulf between the majority of Americans and, what our leadership looks like. So we started from there, from a kind of research, kind of casting, I suppose you would call it, perspective, is to think about what things were important to us. So we wanted to have diversity of race and ethnicity, but also of age, of geography. We wanted women whose work was deeply tied to some of the issues that were keeping us up at night. So whether that was, immigration or racial issues, women who, after the 2016 election, a lot of women were awoken to politics in this country. And I think that was a really exciting moment. We had the Women's March and all these people were sort of, for the first time, like, oh, who is my representative? Or, oh, how do I, get involved more? Those aren't the women we made a film about. The women we made a film about are women who've been in movement for, a long, long time. And this felt like an evolution of power building for themselves and for their communities to go into governance. So we did actually follow 7 candidates and then a series of organizers, particularly the organizers in Georgia. Everyone that we followed ended up winning, except, well, Stacey Abrams didn't, but we think that was stolen, and I suspect many other people agree with us. The other one who didn't make the final cut, but we have cut a short out of, is Representative Deb Haaland from New Mexico, who became in 2018 one of the first 2 Native American women ever elected to the United States Congress. And she was also just reelected this week. So, so we have a standalone short with Deb. But really what was important to us was that we weren't making a campaign film. We really were talking about a change, a sea change in America. And the power of women of color who have this innate, ability to organize their communities, and have always fought for progressive policies. What does that movement look like as it starts to gain enough power and enough numbers to start to become a dominant force? And as Grace said, I don't know, this is maybe the first time I've turned off CNN, in the last week. But if you've been paying attention, you will see that the fruits of the labor that was sown here is what delivered Georgia, inshallah, to the Democrats, which is, power building in communities that are always left off the table.
And just to get back to the idea of starting with the research, would you mind to be a little bit more specific when you say research? Where did you start the research? Let's see, I'm a young documentary filmmaker, and I'm interested to do, a documentary film that wants to find promising characters, promising personalities in this field, right? Because that's what basically you were doing, promising. It was not clear that there would be a victory. What were the paths that you started when you say research, more specifically?
I can start. Just asking, sort of involved in political circles, just sort of asking. There's different organizations that, sort of help train leaders. There was also just asking people personally, like who is an up and coming, who is somebody that that is running, because oftentimes, Rashida Tlaib wasn't even running when we first started out. I remember asking her, are you going to run for something? And she said, no, but here are some other people you might want to research. So it's following a lot of leads, doing interviews, on the phone, kind of researching them online, cold calling them, getting recommendations, then talking to them and actually seeing if it's actually a match with us as a film crew, because not everybody wants to be followed around with a documentary camera, right? So yeah, it's just kind of chasing people down in the same way that anyone does when they're trying to tell a story or, investigate something. So.
And so there are different degrees of structure. Was there any type of arch that you decided, a goal before the editing stage, before the production started, during pre-production?
I wouldn't say not really at that stage. It was a very fast moving story, right? We were shooting in 6 different states with, multiple crews going at the same time. We did not, the first money we raised was mid-March 2018. And the first shoot we did was end of March 2018. So we never had time to stop and breathe and plan anything. We were just constantly in a cycle of raising money, spending that money, filming, coming, Right. And so we didn't, but we knew the stories were strong. We didn't know that they were all going to win. Obviously, I wish we had that kind of power. We'd be rich if we had that kind of power. But also it didn't really matter to us whether they all won or not, because it really isn't a story about winning or losing a race. It's a story about a changing face of democracy. So, but, we picked well, and these women were compelling, not just to us, but to the people who voted for them. And, and that's why we saw the change.
So, talking a little bit about the steps of the filmmaking. So you said that you started the filming at the end of March. How long could you film? Did you start editing before you finished everything? Because sometimes you edit some stuff. I mean, depending on the nature of the film. But what was your structure or production, post production, and release? What was the timing?
We filmed from March until sort of December. The last came back from the last shoot in Georgia at Thanksgiving, so end of November 2018. Then we took a breath. Then in January 2019, we started working with our editor and going out and doing some additional pickup shoots. So it was important to us to not just tell the story of what it's like to run for office, but as a woman of color, what is it like to now be there and in a place where there's only so many of you, you know? So we wanted to give them a chance to, you know, be in their new roles and visit back with them. And then we broadcast summer of 2020. So yeah, we just didn't have the luxury of like filming a little bit, coming back, editing. You know, the timeline of an election was not under our control.
Sure. You didn't want to lose time. And so you said that it's more about examining the change, how change happens, right? If I understand well. The main goal of the film to get close to those dynamics, local dynamics that result in a change, adding all together. And so, do you plan to continue this examination? Because we are still in process, pretty much. So it looks like. So, what would be the continuation of this project?
Are you asking if we're going to continue filming with?
Not exactly with these people, but since you mentioned that you were interested in examining how challenge happens. Mm-hmm. And so this challenge is still pretty much under construction. So probably there are some more aspects left to reveal, to find and reveal and share and discuss. And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking back now. I mean, even before last week, we didn't know that Georgia would be such an important part of this election story and continues to be. You know, is the fate of the democracy, the Senate, hangs in the balance of Georgia, which will be decided on January 5th. And, you know, I mean, on the one hand, it feels like, oh, yeah, it's obvious. Like on election night, when we saw that Georgia was in play and all of those lines in Atlanta, I was like, oh, okay, I'm not that worried because we got to see a movement on the ground. I think for me, what's most interesting is where this movement goes. I mean, we told a story about a movement, and movements are not static. They continue to evolve. And I don't know right now what that is. I think oftentimes in movement, you also have to take the time to reflect and look back on what just happened. You know, how did this come to be? Where's the movement going? I don't have the answers, but I think, you know, it'll be really interesting to see if now, as NYWIFT of New Georgia Project predicted, Georgia is the first state in the Deep South that's going to become, you know, that's going to flip, or that's going to become like a battleground state. Now that that's happened, okay, it hasn't quite happened, but it's happening, right? Like, I think we just need some time to reflect, because we're not the news. We're not trying to follow it on a day-to-day basis. We're trying to, you know, soak it in and understand it, and then see, you know, what new paradigms are going to be revealed just from the story that we have been following. You know, it's just like this, you know, somebody asked the question recently, like, you know, if you look back at And She Could Be Next, there's so many seeds of things that we couldn't have predicted. You know, for example, in the episode that everyone hopefully watched, Nikema Williams, who is a Georgia state senator and activist, you know, she's on the floor of the Georgia state Capitol, you know, asking they want to count every vote. It's the you know, that protest that we filmed where the police come in and she's taken up and, you know, threatened to be strip searched. So she just won her election to become a congresswoman, you know, taking the seat of John Lewis, right? Like that's a story that could go somewhere, you know, or the squad has all been reelected, you know, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, all of these women, and it's getting bigger, you know, like I just feel like Cori Bush, the first Black woman from Missouri, where I grew up, I mean, that was unfathomable. You know, a Black Lives Matter activist is now the first Black congresswoman from Missouri. Like that is something that we couldn't have predicted, but this movement helps tell that story. So I guess I'm just interested to see where this movement goes.
Also, I'll just add that beyond the politics of it, part of the reason we made this is because it's important to women like us. Our whole team, by the way, we should just take a minute to say that. We had a very large team because it was a very large story. So there was no way that Grace and I, you know, were able to be everywhere. So we had a whole team of women of color, extraordinary women of color, directors, filmmakers, colleagues, friends who were basically sort of, you know, helping on the ground to tell, do all the stories as they were happening concurrently. All of us grew up not seeing enough people who look like us on our screens and not seeing enough people in positions of power, right, on our screens. And over the weekend, when Kamala Harris, you know, took the stage to speak as the first ever woman, the first ever, you know, Black woman, the first ever South Asian woman, you know, my timeline was flooded with pictures of my friends and their young brown daughters, you know, daughters that once upon a time were me and Grace and all of our friends, all of our colleagues, you know, like mesmerized by the idea. You know, I have one friend who said, you know, my daughter is 4. She will never remember a time when it wasn't possible for women to serve right alongside men in the highest office in the land, and let alone a brown woman who she looks like, you know. And I think that's the other piece of the story that we were trying to tell, is that truly representation matters, and it has a domino effect of opening a realm of possibility of what you could be. When I grew up, I knew nobody who was a filmmaker, right? So my family were like, filmmaker, doctor, lawyer, engineer, you know, like every other family from my end of the world. But now there's people who look at me, maybe, and they're like, well, this is something I could do too. So for these reasons, it's important that we tell these stories, because in documentary, very often when we tell stories that are only about people of color, we tell victim stories, people who need saving, communities that, you know, are in distress and they're broken. And there's nobody broken in And She Could Be Next. There's nobody broken. These people are claiming power, and they're brilliant. And they're, say again?
They saved us. They
saved us. They save us every time there's an election, you know? And so it's like, how do we shift the narrative power too? Because when you have women of color telling a story about women of color, that narrative power shift comes very naturally.
And before we open, we already have two audience members who sent us questions, but just the last question before we open for questions. Would you speak about some future project that you started already working on?
We are working on getting some rest. That's what we are working on. And we're working on making sure that people understand this Georgia story is super, super important. And so we've been doing a lot of impact work, helping people understand, you know, part of the reason that people don't participate is because politics can feel very confusing and alienating. And it's designed to make you feel like, I don't understand it. I'm stupid. I don't get it. I don't, you know. So a lot of our impact work is to bridge that. And that's what we've been working on since the film was released.
So how do you do the impact work? I'm just curious. What are the steps? So are you organizing like screening, online screening, and
right? So
Q&A,
partnering with organizations. On Halloween, we had 10,000. We sent 100,000 texts to voters in Georgia with the New Georgia Project and a group of volunteers to make sure people had information about going out and voting, where their polling location was, how to check their registration. So we've done a lot of events that basically are centering the voices of women of color, right? We think that the voices of women of color are very, very important and maybe are the key to America coming to a more just and inclusive and equitable world. So we're trying to highlight and spotlight those voices of new leaders who we should all be listening to.
And I would just add one thing that's important both for me and Marge is, we told a story about women of color in politics and government, but that representation is important in every sector, including our own filmmaking, the documentary field. And so we both are personally very involved in, how to make this field more equitable and more, representative of the people who are in it and telling the stories.
So let's open, because I'm sure that there are some other production details. I'm not the only curious person of production details, because Luz Cabrales has a question to you. Can you talk about the hours of footage that the editor had to go through and your process when it comes to the editing process to make the story flow? Well, probably the decisions. So, do you sit down with the editor or let them craft the story as it unfolds and then go through it together?
Yes. So we had a lot of footage. We had maybe 450 something hours. So our fantastic, phenomenal, extraordinary editor, Julie Vitsa, started in January, processing. I think it's really important that the editor looks and sees what's actually there rather than what you remember from the joy of being in a moment, And then, we started to refine, pull out themes that we thought were really important themes. We had these stories didn't really intersect with each other, right? But we knew that we wanted to tell one story about a movement. So a lot of it was trying to figure out what are those transition points? What are the themes that connect these stories together? A lot of people said, you're never going to be able to put this all together, but we had faith, especially faith in Julie. And then, lots of cuts, sometimes in pieces, sometimes getting meatier. And then the last few months, we were all, really in an edit suite together until COVID came along, and then we were no longer in an edit suite together, and we were back to using Zoom and Vimeo, and that was a bit painful, but we feel really lucky that we had our filming done before COVID came along, because a lot of our colleagues have not been that fortunate, and we more or less had it done. We just had to do post.
So, and you worked with one editor or a team of, because 400 hours is brutal. Kind of.
One very patient editor and some extraordinary assistant editors.
Right. And the next question is from Jasmine to the filmmakers. Do you believe that it will take both an abolition of the Electoral College and a new update to the notion of political parties before we see a woman elected president? So, if they need to abolish the Electoral College as an institution and changes, make changes about the political parties as concept, as organizations.
Grace, you want to take us through that?
I mean, I don't know what it will take, but I do believe we should abolish the Electoral College. For sure. I mean, it's a racist institution that is no longer relevant or reflective of, the way this country is, the population. It's really unfair, right? It's like built in. What was the second part of the question?
The two-party system.
Two-party system.
Oh, right. That part, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, I will say I completely agree with Grace about the Electoral College, but here's the thing. We can elect a woman if we go out and vote for a woman, right? It's really that simple. And so we need great candidates, and we need, one of the things I think that has been very hard for me to process is that in 2016, 53% of white women voted for Trump, and in 2020, 58% of white women voted for Trump. And I think that's a question that we have to ask ourselves: what's going on with that, right, in this country? So I think that what Trump has done, and although our film is not really about Trump, I think he doesn't appear. Maybe he appears in one passing slide, but we didn't want to make a film about Trump. Problem isn't Trump. Problem is, Trump is a product of the problem, not the reason for the problem. But I think that there are deep racial divisions, and that reckoning has been upon us all year, and we have to. That also seeps into the political sphere, right? So I think that we can elect a woman before we abolish the Electoral College, although I think we should do that really, really soon. And I don't think we need to break the two-party system, but what we do need to do is to reach voters who don't believe that they have power, who don't believe the system cares about them, who don't believe the system sees them, and get them out to vote. If we see the increase in the voter turnout overall, both parties increase turnout, that's when we know our democracy is starting to work a little bit better, right? When we have people. I was on a Zoom the other day with Reverend Dr. William Barber, and he said, "Can you just dream for a minute? What might our democracy look like if 80% of eligible Americans voted?" We've never known what that might look like, And I think that that's what we need to figure out.
And what might it look like if actually it was made easier to vote? Why aren't people automatically registered to vote as soon as they're turned 18? Why do you actually have to register? It's made so complicated, which, I didn't realize, because we live in California where things are pretty smooth and, people make it very easy. There's a million different languages. You can get your ballot as soon as COVID hit. Everybody here got a mail-in ballot. But in other states, they make it so difficult. And as you see in our film, voter suppression, people have always said, if your vote wasn't that important, why would they be trying to suppress it? So, yeah, even before the party, there's so many issues beyond just the two-party system and the Electoral College. And it's just do we actually value having a representative democracy and voice? So.
Actually, while I was looking at the film, right, it was so shocking, those examples that you showed. You were able to catch on with camera about the voter suppression in Georgia, that there is no park, or as you showed the contrast between the white districts and the colored districts, that in the white districts there were no lines, there were no complications, everything was smooth and well organized. And I was just thinking, how about dedicating a film just for that part? I really felt that was just just like a sample of a film, because itself there were so many variations of the tactic and strategy, and so I found that unbelievable that you were able to video recording those things, because that would, that's an evidence that can be, fight in court. So I was just amazed that they let you. Another question that came up actually is related to this. What type of difficulties, what were the difficulties that you come across while working on this film?
Listen, working on the film is just one long series of difficulties, right? So, everything was difficult, right? The only thing that wasn't difficult, actually, I take that back. The one thing that wasn't difficult was our team, right? Everyone on our team was so aligned with the principles of why we were doing this work. And that felt really fantastic. And everyone was willing to, just go an extra mile. And wholeheartedly. Our team was fantastic, but everything's hard. Raising money is hard. Telling people, yes, people are interested in a story about women of color is hard. Telling people, yes, we as women of color can manage this large budget and deliver to you on time was hard. Telling people that this wasn't just a small, a lot of people said this is just a small piece of the bigger story about the women, the year of the woman, which ignores the importance of race. Completely erases the importance of race. And as we've come to see very clearly in 2020, we can't erase race from a conversation about America. It's impossible. America is founded in race, right? So, but when you're very clear about what you're doing, and I think one of the great benefits of Grace and I having each other was that anytime one of us was feeling wobbly about something, the other person was there to play the mirror and remind us why we were doing this, So we never wavered from our clarity of what we were doing and why we were doing it. And, every no we got, we were like, great, thank you for not wasting our time and telling us no fast so we can go keep moving, And I think Grace says this a lot, that we're, in a way, we felt like the women whose stories we were telling. We also were waging a political fight of our own because, women of color don't get the same amount of money that white men get in our business. They don't have the same kind of faith that they can manage that budget. They don't, all the things that they were struggling with, we were struggling with also. But everything is hard in documentary filmmaking. It's certainly not something to do if you're looking for an easy life.
Everything's hard, but actually the people we were filming were putting it all out on the floor to change their communities. I mean, if you look at what those organizers did in Georgia, day in, day out, they've been doing it since 2018. 2020 was even harder with the pandemic and even more voter suppression. I mean, then our job is easy because we just get to document what they're doing and we get to see wow, we have to tell this story. This is the story that nobody is covering. And this is the story that is the story of 2020. The Georgia, the organizers, on the Black and brown women, but especially the Black women, saving our democracy. I mean, that was the story. And I mean, it's so satisfying. It hasn't even quite set in. I mean, we knew it was happening. And, on election night, I was not worried because I knew that it was going to come down to Georgia and Detroit, Philadelphia, populations where, people of color are voting in droves. This is the playbook that Stacey Abrams often talked about when she started New Georgia Project. This is where we have confidence, and this is why we tell these stories, because no one was telling this story.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add on, not that we want to be too political, but if there's ever a time to be really political, it would be right now. Is Arizona is another example, right? Arizona's on this point of flipping because there are women of color organizers, predominantly Latina women in Arizona who are shifting this voter base. And I have a lot of friends who sort of, threw a lot of money into this election. And obviously we saw a great disappointment that a lot of Senate seats weren't flipped, etc. And if you ask me I have 0 degree in politics. I know nothing except for what I think. But if you were to ask me, I would tell you that the traditional way of doing politics isn't reaching people. And we see that, right, in And She Could Be Next. We see the importance of someone reaching out to you in your own language, with your own culture, that an event that is engaging you politically doesn't feel like you're going to a doctor's visit, right? It feels fun. There's music and there's good food and there's your community is there. And this is the way of meeting voters, the new voters, right, where they are. And I think that what we see is that a lot of money gets poured into kind of traditional approaches and a lot of money, right? If you gave even if you gave half that money to the grassroots organizers, we would have radically different outcomes. But our systems are stuck. They're stuck in this kind of old school way of doing things. So I think if there's one big thing we walk away from this election understanding is we must fund these grassroots organizations led by communities of color, most often women of color, across this country who know where to go, which doors to go knock on, right? And how to have a conversation with someone who's never voted about why it matters that they vote, right? And that isn't by getting flyers through your door for such and such candidate or being bombarded by endless ads. One contradicts the next, contradicts the next. I mean, your head spins, right? That's not how to do it. So if we believe in our democracy, then it is our job to try to engage every voter in it. And if we don't believe in our democracy, or rather we would rather keep our democracy as majority power in white and male hands, then we should continue to do what the parties are doing.
Right, maybe in other words, right, if you don't include communities in your society, then can't just include during the electional campaign, right? It doesn't work in that way.
Totally, and it's also, that's very important. Don't just come knocking when it's an election, but also let them lead, right? Don't come to them and ask for them to help your plan. Go to them and ask them, how do we help your plan? Because these ladies, these women know what they're doing. They've shown us that they know what they're doing. I don't know how many more receipts they need to show us before we actually start to fund them in the ways that we fund these big other democratic groups, So it's an interesting time, it's an interesting time in America's story. And I think that's what we wanted to catch the beginning of in Then She Could Be Next.
And basically what you prove that it's not a short term. You cannot make change just with campaigns, but it's like sowing the seeds, because exactly now we arrived where they wanted to arrive, or they were expected to arrive.
And also that it's not just, you don't just matter to me in my community because you have a vote. Right. You matter to me because I want to help our problems. So what are your problems? Transportation? Okay, let's work on that. Right. Like healthcare, let's work on that. Support for single moms, let's work on that. It's not just about elections. We're also obsessed in this country about elections, and especially presidential elections. That's not change, right? Change is really helping a community thrive, and that's what these organizers are doing. And along the way, they also remind you of the power of your vote.
What I found very interesting in your film, that basically you broke down what is politics supposed to be, because politics supposed to be find a person who is able to help to resolve everyday issues, right? It's not just changing checks, right? So it was very interesting that basically what I saw. Let's get back to the origin. Where did this started? What's the main goal here? We have other question. What do you think of Kamala Harris getting elected, and what do organizers like us do to ensure women continue to have a place at the table? This is Christine Wisniewski's question.
Grace?
What do you think of Kamala Harris getting elected?
I mean, I'm excited. I mean, it's a historic candidacy, the first woman, first Black woman, first South Asian woman, daughter of immigrants from California, my state, my senator, I mean, whether or not I believe in every single policy that Kamala Harris stood for before now, I think that this is an opportunity that is historic, right? And I think that means something. Like we said before, you feel seen for the first time in terms of this level of politics. I mean, it's all tied up with, Trump is not elected too, right? Like there's some funny signs that people have seen, like it's like Kamala Harris for president and Joe Biden, right? I mean, that's really exciting to have a woman of color in this executive branch, which has never happened before. What was the second part of the question?
More women. How do we make sure more women get elected?
Have place at the table.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I've made 2 different films now about women in politics, and one thing that I learned is, the organizers say this, the politicians themselves say this: women never are going to say, yes, I'm going to run for office. When you first ask them, you have to ask them multiple times, because everybody always says like, oh, no, I'm not, that's not for me. I'd rather be influential behind the scenes. That's my place. until they realized that they could do the job better. You know, I mean, every single person I've ever interviewed realized like they'd started to run because they realized, oh, like if I don't do it, like who's going to do it? They have a mission. I mean, one just really simple thing besides like supporting the organizations and supporting the women, you know, is asking people, you know, ask that woman, your colleague or sister or friend who is so involved in everything, you know, wanting to make it better. Ask them if they've ever considered running for office. I say this to Marge all the time. I want her to like be in power because I see how powerful she is. You know, I've seen upfront how she works, like how she is, you know, like really thoughtful about, you know, all kinds of issues. Like I couldn't do it. I mean, I have another role, but you know, ask the woman that you think you would like to represent you in whatever capacity to become a leader.
I just add a quick story. A friend of Grace's, you know, the show aired in, you know, in the summer. And in the summer, we were in this really difficult moment in this country, right? We were all like in this moment of reckoning. A friend of Grace's reached out after it aired to say that a friend of hers had seen And She Could Be Next and had been so moved. And this was a woman who had been asked multiple times if she would run for a school board in her community, and she always declined, even though she was very active and involved with the work. She was like, well, that's not for me, I wouldn't run, you know. And after she saw And She Could Be Next, she said that it occurred to her that it would be a betrayal to the film and to all these other women if she didn't run. And so she decided that she would put in her name and actually run, and she was just elected to the school board in Northern California, where she lives.
She ran an incredible campaign. I mean, she was overqualified, you know? And I would just say, if you like the film, please tell people to watch it because it might inspire them to actually, you know, run for office. We have women at every level, including a 20-year-old college student, right? Bushra Amiwala. I mean, she didn't need to be asked to run multiple times. She saw it within herself, but most of us don't have that kind of confidence. But, you know, I'm inspired every day by the women in our film and the organizers, because not everybody wants to run for office, but there are so many ways to, you know, affect the community. And yeah, just ask them and show them examples like this, because, you know, I dare people not to be inspired by the women in our film.
Yeah, and also I'll just say, run for other things. Like Grace just got announced that Grace has just joined the board of the IDA. I was on the board of the IDA for many years. I'm on the board of Chicken and Egg now. Like, these are all systems that have some power in shaping the industry that we're in. So you don't have to be a politician, but like, what do you care about? What do you care about in your world? And how can you be part of making those decisions, being at that table? And don't be shy. Just like, go take your power, go claim your power. We've got to break this cycle that somehow we have to wait for permission. We are done waiting for permission. Claim your power. That's how we do it. And tell every other woman you know who has power to claim hers too.
So on that note, you think that we have the responsibility as well in us to move forward and to open more doors, right? Not
who else is going to open them for us? I mean, for reals. Here we are in the year 2020, and finally a woman has entered the White House as the number 2. I mean, come on. Nobody's opening these doors for us. It's up to us. I think this is really important. And I'll just stay in the frame of politics, but it applies everywhere. Nobody is coming to save us. Nobody is coming to save us, especially if you're a woman of color. Nobody's coming to save you. You are going to save you. You are the strongest, most connected, most capable person. You can raise 100 people by spending half an hour on the phone and sending a few emails. Like, you have that power. There's not one of you who doesn't. So use it, right? Because if the system was going to roll out a red carpet and invite us to a welcome banquet, we would have all been in power by now, and we haven't been. So, you know, we are the ones who are going to save ourselves. It's up to us to do it.
I wouldn't like to close just yet. I would just like to walk back a little bit because I'm really curious. What were the 3 most difficult takes? Because you said that making a documentary itself is constant problem solving. So there is no not enough time to make the list about the difficulties. But just, or even just the most difficult shot that we can see in the film, and that required the most work behind the scene to get that shot, if you can recall.
I mean, some of the shots that required the most work didn't end up in the film, which is also always amusing. It's not easy to get access to politicians. It's just not easy. Like, it's a constant process of negotiation, and they may say yes to you at 11 a.m. and by 12:30 it's a different idea and a different plan, a different person who wasn't the person who said yes to you. You got to start, it's like a constant thing. So that was, really, really hard and persistent. And unfortunately, we live in a media landscape where we do have it's a reality that one wrong word or one whatever, with the sort of, the news media, that can ricochet. So people with cameras are not always super welcome in the inner circles. So that I would say was the sort of most consistent, enduring, difficult thing. Do you have anything else, Grace?
I mean, it just took a long time, like from the initial idea to do it, many incarnations, roller coaster. Is this a feature? Is it a series? Are we going to get money? Like I said, it was like a political campaign, constantly, in crisis mode, trying to, pivot when, we didn't have money. And, like we said, like, it's not a project that people automatically saw, that this is the story of the 2020 elections. I mean, who could have predicted that this would be Georgia back in 2018 when we were trying to raise money? I mean, we knew it was important, but, people lack imagination sometimes, or they don't have the trust that we see something that we have access to that, is going to be a news story about American politics. And we were so, the clarity that we had, that we wanted to stick a stake in the ground, that you cannot talk about American politics without talking about race and gender. That was important to us, and we just stuck with it.
And so this pre-production, while you were trying to get the funds for the film, how long did it take?
Probably, maybe 6 months. We were like having, we set out, we wanted to make a series. We thought it would be maybe a 4-hour series in 8 parts, half hours. We went and knocked on, I think maybe this answers your original question. Another real challenge was how many people were making films about politics in that cycle in 2018, right? So there was a lot of other films who were also following women, or, the Knock Down the House, which was following for women running for Congress. There's a bunch of us, and we were all talking to the same, 15 funders and networks all at the same time. So the networks had zero incentive to jump in on anybody's project. And so we had to wait for the stories to play out. Who would have known that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would become AOC, right? But when that win happened, essentially for her in May, that film was able to move forward a little bit faster because her primary sort of decided her race. So I think that was just a real challenge. Was we thought we had such a great, clear idea that how could anyone resist this idea? Oh my God, this is the idea. This is finally the idea. But that was not at all the reception we had. So we just got busy and, raised it independently and ended up where we did.
So you started the shooting with your own funds?
Well, not our own funds, but we raised philanthropic money. In the end, our entire budget was raised from philanthropy.
From philanthropy.
Grants and donations. And, yeah.
Right.
Started with our own labor, not getting paid.
I'm sorry, what?
But we started with our own labor, not getting paid.
Right.
We didn't get paid for I think we've only been paid in the year 2020.
Well, you certainly got paid. You certainly got paid because karma paid. So
we have a great suite waiting for us on the other side. There's a lot of good karma.
And so I just wanted to thank to be here, and we soon start the screening. So if anyone would like to have some other questions, because we have just a few minutes to close the floor. And
so I have a question, Anna. This is the film coming next after this?
I think so.
So let me set a little scene then. So this is the second part. What you guys are seeing is episode 2. You know, we thought that given the timing of today being so close to the election, it's episode 2 that we shared with you. But episode 1 exists, and it's actually where you get to meet all the people and all the stories. You see Rashida Tlaib win in her primary. You know, you meet everyone really in episode 1, but there wasn't time. So we're dropping you in to the story in October 2018 in Georgia, about 3 or 4 weeks prior to the election. And when you watch it, then you're going to go on Amazon and you're going to catch episode 1 and watch that and catch yourself up.
So, so just some real. Oh, hi, Barbara.
Hey, hi.
Hi.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap, but I want to thank you all for coming on and doing this. And the film came at such a pivotal moment. I did watch it over the weekend after the election called. I actually was at a salon when it all happened, and I was surrounded by beautiful Black and brown women, and we all just started crying. So I told everybody to go watch this and sign up. So thank you again for being here with us. Anna, thank you for moderating, and I can't wait to see more of your work. You're truly both of you are just such inspiring women.
That's very kind. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.